In the spring of 1974, a flatbed truck disappeared from a salvage yard in Odessa, Texas. It was worth maybe $2,000. A minor theft in an oil boom town where crime was as common as dust. But that truck belonged to the Mitchell family. 5 men who had a simple rule: you don't steal from them. The thieves were the Renfro brothers, 4 men who thought they could take what they wanted and vanish into the chaos of the oil fields. They were wrong. Over the next 4 months, 21 men would die. Not just the Renfros, but everyone connected to them. Friends, employers, anyone who helped them, hid them, or simply knew where they were. The bodies were buried in shallow graves on Mitchell land, where they would stay hidden for 45 years. This is the story of the longest killing spree in Texas history, a story no one ever heard, until now. To understand what happened, you have to understand the land. West Texas in the 1970s wasn't just a place, it was a state of mind. A vast, empty expanse of scrub brush and mesquite, where the wind never stopped blowing and the sun beat down on a landscape dotted with the skeletal remains of oil derricks. It was a place where a man could disappear, and no one would notice for a very long time. 12 miles northeast of Odessa, on 47 acres of that unforgiving land, sat the Mitchell salvage yard. It wasn't much to look at. A collection of rusted Quonset huts, mountains of twisted metal, the carcasses of trucks and oil equipment baking in the sun. It was a graveyard for machines. But to the Mitchell family, it was everything. 3 generations of work, built from nothing by men who understood a fundamental truth about the American Southwest. You either took what you needed, or you went without. Grady Mitchell was 55 years old in March of 1974. He was the patriarch, a man with a face carved from the same red rock that lay beneath his property. He had inherited the business from his father, Horace, who had started it during the war, when scrap metal was worth its weight in gold. Grady had built it into an empire, a name that commanded respect across the Permian Basin. He had 4 men he trusted completely. His younger brother, Wendell, 50, who handled the books and the strategy with a mind like a steel trap. And his 3 sons, Clayton, the eldest at 45, steady and reliable, the heir apparent. Doyle, 40, the quiet one, who worked without complaint. And Rafford, 35, the youngest, the most volatile. The one who looked at the world with a cold, flat stare that made other men look away. Together, they were a fortress. They paid fair prices, they honored their agreements, and they dealt harshly with anyone who tried to cheat them. In a part of Texas where the law was stretched thin and justice was often a personal matter, the Mitchells had earned a reputation that kept most trouble away. Most trouble, but not all. The flatbed was a 1968 Ford F600, painted the same faded red as every other Mitchell vehicle. It wasn't the newest truck, it wasn't the most valuable, but it held a significance that went far beyond its market worth. Horace Mitchell had bought that truck new. It was one of the last purchases he made before the heart attack that killed him in 1968. He had driven it himself during those final months. He'd haul loads, and he'd talk to Grady about the future, about expansion, about legacy, about the responsibility of carrying on what one generation built for the next. When Horace died, Grady kept the truck in service, but he treated it with a reverence that his workers learned to respect. It was always parked in the covered area near the main building, protected from the weather. It was a monument. On the night of March 11th, 1974, someone drove that monument off the Mitchell property. Rafford discovered the theft at dawn on March 12th. He arrived early to prepare for a collection run. The space where the flatbed should have been was empty. The chain on the gate had been cut. Tire tracks led out to the county road and then vanished into the vastness. He called his father immediately. Grady arrived within the hour, his face carrying a stillness that his sons had learned to fear more than any outburst of rage. He examined the cut chain. He studied the tire tracks. He walked the perimeter, looking for any other sign of intrusion. "Just the flatbed," Rafford reported. "Nothing else touched. Whoever did this knew exactly what they wanted." Grady didn't answer for a long time. He was thinking, calculating, planning responses to a provocation he understood better than his son did. The salvage business wasn't just about scrap. It was about territory, about the complex web of rivalries that determined who prospered and who failed. And lately, there had been tension with a group of men who operated on the edges of the legitimate trade. The Renfro brothers. Castle Renfro was 43, the eldest of 4 brothers who had drifted into Odessa from Louisiana in '71. They came chasing the oil money, but they found their niche in the shadow economy. Stolen drill bits, tools that walked off trucks. Sometimes entire vehicles repainted and resold across state lines. They operated out of a rented warehouse on the south side of town, keeping just enough legitimate business to avoid scrutiny. Their relationship with the Mitchells had been contentious from the start. The Mitchells had made it clear they wouldn't deal with the Renfros. They saw them as thieves, not businessmen. The Renfros took it as an insult, a statement that they weren't good enough to do business with the mighty Mitchell family. It had simmered for 3 years. Petty provocations, friction. But nothing like this. Grady knew it was the Renfro before he had any proof. The theft was too specific, too personal. A common thief would have taken copper, aluminum, something easy to fence. Taking the flatbed made no economic sense. It made perfect sense as an insult, a message. That evening, Grady gathered his family in the cramped kitchen of the main house, the same room where Horace had taught his sons the principles that guided their lives. "It was the Renfro," Grady said. "Has to be," Wendell agreed. "Nobody else would be that stupid." Clayton suggested they go to the sheriff. His tone made it clear he didn't favor the option. Grady shot it down. Sheriff Puckett couldn't find his own ass with both hands. And even if he could, the Renfro will have that truck repainted and across the state line before anyone gets around to looking. Rafford spoke up. "So we handle it ourselves. We find out who helped them. And then we make sure everyone understands what happens when you steal from the Mitchells." He wasn't just talking about the Renfros. He was talking about everyone. Anyone who might think the Mitchells had gone soft. "How far are we willing to go?" Clayton asked. Grady met his son's eyes. "As far as we have to." The investigation began the next morning. The Mitchells had resources law enforcement lacked, connections throughout the salvage trade, access to information networks that existed below the official surface. Wendell handled the intelligence. He spent a week making calls, asking careful questions about the Renfro brothers. What he learned confirmed Grady's suspicions. The Renfros had been bragging. Hints and knowing smiles, the satisfaction of a successful operation. More importantly, Wendell learned they hadn't acted alone. "They've got a network," Wendell reported. "Maybe 15, 20 men, drivers, muscle, fences. It's bigger than we thought." "Who specifically helped with the flatbed?" Grady asked. "I've got 4 names for certain. Haskell planned it. His brothers Dalton, Porter, and Lyle were involved, but there were others. A driver named Emmett Scoggins, a scrapyard owner named Dooley, that's 6, and there will be more. People who knew, people who helped hide it. If we're going to respond, we need the full scope." The mapping took 3 weeks. They were patient, methodical. They didn't rush. They didn't alert the Renfros. What emerged was a network more extensive than any of them had imagined. Drivers who hauled stolen equipment across state lines. Mechanics who altered vehicles. Fences in Lubbock, Amarillo, even Albuquerque. And protection. "There's a deputy," Wendell reported in early April. "Name of Harmon Teague. He's on the Renfro payroll. Tips them off when there's heat. Makes sure investigations go nowhere." A deputy? That complicated things. It clarifies things, Grady corrected. It tells us we can't rely on the law. The system is compromised. If we want justice, we have to take it ourselves. What exactly are we talking about? Doyle asked. Grady looked at his son with something like disappointment. If we beat them up, they heal. If we burn their warehouse, they rebuild. The only way to end this is to remove them entirely. You're talking about killing them. I'm talking about eliminating a threat to our family. To everything we've built, yes. That means killing them. All of them. Not just the Renfros. Everyone who helped them. We burn it down to the roots, or it grows back. The room went silent. Even for men raised in the hard culture of West Texas, the scope of what Grady was proposing was staggering. Wendell consulted his notes. The Renfros, that's 4. Their core crew, another 6 or 7. The deputy, the fences, the mechanics, the drivers who know enough to be dangerous. He paused. 20 people, give or take. 20 people who have declared war on this family, Grady said. He stood, his eyes moving from son to son. I'm not asking for a vote. This is my decision. But I need to know if you're with me. All of you. Because what we're about to do will bind us together forever. We commit completely, or we don't do it at all. The silence stretched. Wendell spoke first. I'm with you, brother. Clayton nodded. Whatever needs to be done. Doyle swallowed, but his voice was steady. I'm in. All eyes turned to Rafford, the youngest, the one who had found the empty space where the flatbed should have been. That was Daddy's truck, Rafford said. The last thing he ever bought. They didn't just steal property. They stole a piece of our family. I'm in. Grady nodded. Then we begin. Patient. Careful. One at a time. So nobody sees the pattern until it's too late. The first name on the list was Willard Skaggs, a sometime driver for the Renfros, a drifter, a man who had helped scout the Mitchell property, the kind of man who could disappear and no one would notice. Willard Skaggs lived in a trailer on the western edge of Odessa. It sat in a dusty lot with half a dozen others, home to transients and oil field workers who came and went with the wind. He was alone on the night of April 3rd, 1974. Clayton and Rafford drew the assignment. It was supposed to be simple. Get in, get it done, get out. They approached the trailer after midnight. A light was on inside. Skaggs was awake, sitting at a small table, drinking beer and watching a small black and white television. He didn't hear them coming. The wind covered their footsteps. Clayton went in first. He had a length of steel pipe in his hand. He moved fast, crossing the small space before Skaggs could even turn. The pipe came down. Skaggs crumpled. He lay on the stained carpet, unconscious. Alive, but not for long. Then Rafford handed Clayton the knife. Finish it. Clayton looked at the knife. He looked at the man on the floor. He looked at his brother's face. There was no hesitation there. No doubt. I don't know if I can. You can. You have to. Clayton knelt. He pressed the blade against the soft flesh beneath Skaggs's jaw. He drew it across. The motion was too fast and impossibly slow all at once. The blood came immediately, more than he expected, spreading across the carpet in a dark pool that seems to grow forever. Skaggs made a sound, a gurgle, a gasp. His eyes opened for a moment, found Clayton's face. Confusion, accusation. Then nothing. Clayton made it outside before the vomiting started. He collapsed against the side of the trailer and emptied his stomach into the dirt. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. Rafford found him 5 minutes later. First one's the hardest. It gets easier. How do you know? Because Daddy told me. He killed a man in Korea. Said the first one nearly broke him. But the second was easier, and the third. Eventually, it's just something you do. Clayton looked at his brother, searching for any sign that Rafford was as affected as he was. There was nothing. just calm efficiency. What if I can't do it again? Then you stay home. But you're either in this all the way or you're not in it at all. Clayton thought about his father, about the flatbed, about his grandfather's truck. He thought about what it would mean to show weakness in a world that devoured the weak. He stood up. I'm in. All the way. They buried Skaggs before dawn. The grave was shallow. The West Texas earth was rocky, fighting back against their shovels. When it was done, they covered the spot with debris. There was no marker, no indication that anything had happened. Just 47 acres of scrubland. Clayton stood looking at the spot. Grady appeared beside him in the gray light. You did good. I know it wasn't easy. How many more? However many it takes. We don't stop until the Renfros and everyone who helped them understand what it costs to steal from this family. Daddy, what if this changes us? What if we become something we can't come back from? Grady turned to look at his son. His face was almost gentle. We're already something we can't come back from, son. We became that the moment we decided to do this. The only question now is whether we see it through. The killings continued through April. Drifters and part-timers, men on the periphery, men who wouldn't be missed. They died one by one, shot, stabbed, beaten, buried in the same patch of ground. But Clayton was pulled back from the front lines. His father had seen his reaction. He assigned him to surveillance and logistics. Let Doyle and Rafford handle the operations that required steadier nerves. It was during one of these surveillance missions that Clayton discovered something that changed everything. He was watching Doley's scrapyard, the place where the stolen flatbed had been repainted. He noticed a vehicle that didn't belong, an Ector County Sheriff's cruiser parked in the alley behind the main building. The occupant just sat there, watching. Clayton watched for 2 hours. The deputy never left the vehicle, never approached the building, just watched. Someone else was investigating the Renfros. He reported this to his father, expecting alarm. Deputy Harmon Teague, Grady said. We already know about him. He's on the Renfro payroll, has been for years. Then why is he watching the scrapyard? Because things are going wrong for his employers. 7 of their people have disappeared. Teague knows something's happening, even if he doesn't know what. That makes him dangerous. That makes him a target. I was planning to leave him for later. Killing a deputy is complicated, but if he's starting to look too closely, we may need to move up the timeline. Harmon Teague lived alone, divorced, no kids. He had a gambling problem. $20,000 in debt to men in Midland who didn't accept excuses. Everyone who knew him knew about it. Wendell devised the plan. They would make it look like he ran. Pack his bags, empty his accounts, leave his badge and gun behind. A man fleeing his debts doesn't take the things that identify him as law enforcement. He takes cash and disappears into Mexico. The plan required precision. They needed access to his house. They needed his schedule. They found it. A Wednesday night card game that took him away from home for hours. Clayton was watching Teague's house on the night of April 29th when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Another car, parked 2 blocks away, its occupant watching the same house. For a long moment, Clayton was certain they had been discovered. Then the other car's dome light came on. He saw the driver's face. It was Emmett Scoggins, the driver, one of the names on their list. He was supposed to be a target, not an investigator. But here he was, watching Deputy Teague's house with an intensity that suggested purpose. Clayton drove home and reported what he had seen. Scoggins watching Teague? Grady repeated, brow furrowed. That doesn't make sense. They're on the same side. Unless they're not, Wendell said slowly.
unless the Renfro organization is starting to fracture. 7 of their people have vanished. Nobody knows why. Paranoia takes hold. Maybe Scoggins thinks Teague is the one eliminating them.
Maybe he's planning to kill him himself. We could let him do it, Rafford said. Let Scoggins kill Teague, then take Scoggins. 2 problems solved. Too risky, Grady replied. We don't control what Scoggins does. If he botches it, the investigation goes in directions we can't predict. We take Scoggins first. The taking of Emmett Scoggins was the first operation that almost went wrong. They found him at a cheap motel near the highway. They approached after midnight, expecting to find him alone and asleep. Scoggins was awake and armed. The first shot came through the motel room door before they could even knock. A bullet that missed Rafford's head by inches. Chaos. Rafford kicked in the door. Doyle provided cover. Scoggins was firing wildly, panicked. A bullet caught Doyle in the shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to the carpet. Another punched through the wall inches from Rafford's face. Then Rafford fired. 1 shot. A round through Scoggins' chest. He dropped instantly. The silence afterward was deafening. "Doyle!" Rafford scrambled to his brother. The wound was pumping blood. "Hurts like hell. Through and through, I think. We need to get out of here." Gunshots at a motel meant police. They had minutes. Rafford made a decision. He grabbed Scoggins' body, dragged it to their truck. He helped his wounded brother into the passenger's seat. They were driving away before the first lights came on in neighboring units. Doyle was treated at the Mitchell property. Wendell, who had learned field medicine in the military, cleaned and bandaged the wound. The bullet had passed through the meat of his shoulder. It was serious, but not fatal. But the incident had shaken them all. "We almost lost Doyle," Clayton said during the family meeting that followed. "We almost got caught. This is getting out of control." Scoggins was paranoid, Rafford countered. "We adapt. We move forward." "Or we stop," Clayton said. "We've killed 8 people. The Renfro operation is crippled. Half their network is gone. Maybe that's enough." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Grady. "You want to stop?" he said to Clayton. "After everything we've done, you want to stop." "I want us to survive. I want us to still be here in 10 years, not dead or in prison." "And the Renfros? The ones still alive? What happens when they regroup? When they come back stronger because we showed them we could be outlasted?" "Maybe they won't." Grady shook his head. "I raised you to be smarter than that. Men like the Renfros don't learn lessons. They wait for opportunities. If we stop now, we're not showing mercy. We're showing weakness." "So we just keep killing until there's no one left?" "Until the job is done. That's the only message that sticks." Clayton was alone in his doubts. The family had made its decision. "Fine, but when this is over, I need you to promise me something. That it ends. That we go back to being what we were, a family. Not this." Grady studied his son. "I promise. When the Renfros are gone, we stop." It was a promise Grady intended to keep. It was a promise that would prove much harder to keep than anyone imagined. The bullet wound changed Doyle. He had always been the quiet one, but in the weeks after the shooting, something shifted behind his eyes. He withdrew. Spent hours sitting alone on the porch, staring at the horizon. He stopped sleeping. When he did sleep, he had nightmares, woke up screaming. Rafford reported it to his father. "He's talking to himself. I heard him last night in the equipment shed, having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. Apologizing, saying he was sorry over and over." "Apologizing to who?" "I don't know, but I've seen men break before. And Doyle has that look. Grady considered this. They were in the middle of something that couldn't be stopped. The Renfro operation was wounded, but not dead. Talk to him. Find out what's going on. But make it clear we can't stop.
Not now.
Rafford found Doyle in the equipment shed that evening, sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at his hands. "You want to talk about it?" Doyle looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Talk about what?" "The nightmares, the not sleeping, the conversations with yourself." Doyle was quiet for a long moment. "I see them. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. Skaggs. The others. They're standing around my bed, watching me. Not saying anything. Just watching. That's guilt. It's your brain trying to process. I'm not crazy, Rafford. I know the dead don't actually visit. But knowing that doesn't make them go away." Rafford didn't know what to say. He had killed more men than Doyle. He felt nothing. He slept soundly. Was that strength? Or was it something broken inside him?
We can't stop.
I'm not asking to stop. I need you to understand that this is costing me something. Something I'm not sure I'll ever get back. It's costing all of us. Did we have to kill all of them? The drivers, the mechanics, men who were just doing jobs for people who paid them. Did they deserve to die for that? Rafford had no answer. It was a question he had deliberately avoided. We're in too deep to second-guess now. The only thing we can do is finish it and try to live with it afterward. I can try, but I'm making no promises about what happens after. Deputy Harmon Teague died on May 8, 1974. The operation went exactly as planned. The staged departure, the empty bank accounts, the badge and gun left behind. But the killing itself was not clean. Teague fought. When Grady and Rafford confronted him in his living room, he went for his weapon, despite the rifles pointed at his chest. Rafford shot him twice. Neither wound was immediately fatal. Teague collapsed against his coffee table, bleeding heavily. "You're making a mistake," he gasped. "You have no idea what you're starting." "We're finishing something," Grady replied. "Something your friends started." "The Renfros are nothing. But if you kill a deputy, you'll bring down heat you can't imagine. The Rangers, the FBI, they don't let cop killers walk. They won't know you were killed. They'll think you ran." Teague laughed, a wet sound that sprayed blood. "You think you're the first family to try this? You all end the same way. Dead or in prison. Your children paying for your sins." "My children are paying for my sins right now. You're the reason we had to become what we are. You took Renfro money. You helped them operate. So this is your fault." Teague died slowly. It took nearly 20 minutes. 20 minutes of labored breathing, a weakening pulse, the gradual dimming of his eyes. When it was over, they wrapped the body and loaded it into the truck. Teague was buried on Mitchell land in a grave deeper than the others, as if the extra depth might somehow contain the consequences of killing a lawman. 9 down, 12 to go. The Renfro brothers were getting desperate. Haskell, the eldest, had gone to ground, moving between locations every few days, trusting no one. Dalton had fled to Amarillo. Porter had fortified himself in their warehouse. Lyle had disappeared entirely. No one knew where he was. Their organization was in shambles. The drivers had quit. The mechanics had refused to work. The fences had stopped taking their calls. The network that had taken years to build had been dismantled in weeks. But desperate men are dangerous. On May 15th, Porter Renfro made his move. He recruited 4 men who were either too loyal or too stupid to abandon ship. He armed them. His plan was simple: find the Mitchells, kill as many as possible, send a message. They hit the salvage yard at 2 a.m. 2 trucks through the front gate, firing at anything that moved. They expected to find the family asleep, unprepared, vulnerable. What they found was an ambush. Grady had anticipated retaliation. He had prepared the yard as a killing ground. Fortified positions, overlapping fields of fire, escape routes the attackers wouldn't know existed. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. Porter Renfro died in the cab of his truck, shot through the windshield by Clayton, who found that shooting at men trying to kill his family was easier than shooting at men kneeling in the dirt. 2 of Porter's associates died in the first exchange. The other 2 tried to flee and were cut down by Rafford and Wendell before they reached the gate. 5 more bodies, 14 total. But the victory came with a cost. Wendell had been hit, a round through his thigh that shattered his femur. He lay in the dirt, his blood mixing with the blood of the men who had attacked them. "Get him inside!" They brought him into the house. The wound was bad. "He needs a hospital," Clayton said. "This is beyond what we can handle. A hospital means questions. Questions mean attention." "Daddy, he'll die without proper care." Grady looked at his brother, the man who had stood beside him through everything. He made a decision. Find someone who can help, a doctor who will keep quiet, a veterinarian, anyone who can treat this without reporting it. Clayton made calls. He found a retired Army medic living outside Midland, a man who had treated gunshot wounds in Vietnam and asked no questions when cash was involved. The medic came. He spent 4 hours working on Wendell's leg. He stabilized him. Wendell would survive, but he would never walk the same again. The femur was too damaged. He would spend the rest of his life with a limp and a cane. The attack changed the dynamic. Before, the Mitchells had been predators. Now they were also prey. "We need to end this quickly," Grady said. "We've been patient. That was right when we had the luxury of time. We don't have that anymore. We find them all, this week, whatever it takes. That means risking exposure. We're already exposed. Porter's attack proves that. They know who we are. They know where we are. The only thing keeping us safe now is making sure there's no one left to act on that knowledge." Clayton spoke up. His voice carried exhaustion and doubt. "We've got 14 bodies buried on our land. 14 men who had families, people who will eventually wonder. We add more bodies. We increase the chances that someone discovers what we've done. No one's going to discover anything. This land has been in our family for 30 years. Nobody comes here without permission. Nobody has any reason to dig. And in 50 years, when we're gone and someone else owns this property, what happens when they start building and turning over dirt? That's a problem for another generation. Right now, our problem is survival." Clayton wanted to argue, but he saw the resolve in his father's eyes, the agreement on his brothers' faces. They were committed. "Fine. Let's finish it." Haskell Renfro was found 3 days later. He was hiding at a hunting cabin outside Kermit, 40 miles from Odessa, relying on isolation to protect him. He made a mistake. He trusted a cousin who owed gambling debts to men who owed favors to the Mitchells. Information in West Texas flowed through channels that had nothing to do with law enforcement. They surrounded the cabin at dawn. 5 against 1. Overwhelming force. When they called for Haskell to come out, he surprised them. He walked out unarmed, his hands raised, his face carrying an expression of profound exhaustion. "I'm done. I'm tired of running. Tired of waiting to die. Just make it quick." Grady studied the man who had started it all. "You stole from my family. You took something that meant everything to us." "It was a truck. A goddamn truck worth maybe $2,000. It was my father's truck. The last thing he ever bought. You didn't steal property, Haskell. You stole memory. You stole legacy. And for that, you and everyone connected to you has paid with their lives." Haskell laughed, a sound with no humor. 14 people. You killed 14 people over a truck. 15. And you're about to make 16. Jesus Christ. Haskell shook his head. We thought we were the criminals. We thought we were the dangerous ones. But you're something else entirely. Monsters. Killing machines dressed up as family men. We're survivors. Men who refused to be victims. They took him inside, questioned him for hours. He provided what information he had. Dalton's location in Amarillo, names of associates who might still be loyal, his best guess about where Lyle had fled. When there was nothing left to learn, Rafford took him outside. The shot echoed across the empty landscape, heard by no one who would report it. 16 down, 5 to go. Dalton was taken from his cousin's house in Amarillo, dragged from his bed at 3 a.m. The cousin, a man named Vernon Phelps who had known about the flatbed theft and done nothing, joined Dalton in death. 18 down. 3 men who had acted as enforcers for the Renfros, who had survived the attack on the salvage yard by hiding, were found and eliminated. 21 down. Only Lyle remained. The youngest Renfro brother had proven smarter than the rest. He had fled not just Odessa, but Texas. He made his way to New Mexico, then Arizona. He used cash and false names. The trail went cold. Finding him took 6 weeks. It required resources the Mitchells didn't have. Private investigators, contacts in law enforcement who owed favors. It cost money the family could barely afford. Attention that risked exposure. But Grady was committed. He had promised that every person connected to the theft would die. Grady Mitchell was a man who kept his promises. They found Lyle in Tucson on July 19, 1974, working at a used car lot under a name that wasn't his. He had grown a beard, lost weight, transformed himself into someone who bore little resemblance to the man who had helped steal a flatbed truck 4 months earlier. Clayton and Rafford made the trip together, 18 hours across desert highways. They took Lyle from his apartment on the night of July 20th, drove him out into the desert, a place where the sand stretched endlessly and the stars blazed. "Why?" Lyle asked. "Why all of this? Why couldn't you just take the truck back and call it even?" "Because it was never about the truck," Rafford said. "It was about what you thought you could do to us, what you thought you could get away with. And now 20 people are dead." 21, Clayton agreed. "And when we bury you, it'll be 22. And then it'll be over." "Will you be able to live with it?" Clayton thought about the question, about the faces that appeared when he closed his eyes. "I don't know. But that's not your concern anymore." The shot echoed across the desert. The last casualty of a war that had started with a stolen truck and ended with 21 bodies scattered across the American Southwest. The killing was over. What came after would prove to be its own kind of hell. The silence that followed was worse than the killing. Clayton had expected relief. He imagined that once the last body was buried, once the debt was paid in full, he would feel something like peace. Instead, he felt hollow. The drive back from Arizona took 18 hours. He spent most of it staring out the window. They didn't discuss what they had done. There was nothing left to say. When they arrived home, Grady was waiting on the porch. "It's done. It's done. Then we bury this. We don't speak of it again, not to each other, not to anyone. As far as the world knows, nothing happened here. The Renfros moved on. Life continues." Life returned to something like normal. The salvage yard reopened. The trucks ran their routes. The Mitchells attended church on Sundays, maintained the appearance of respectable citizens. But appearances were all they had left. Doyle's deterioration accelerated. Without the purpose the hunt had provided, he collapsed into himself. By September, he couldn't work. By November, he couldn't leave the house. By January, he was hospitalized, diagnosed with acute nervous exhaustion, a polite term for a complete mental breakdown. He spent the next 3 years in and out of psychiatric facilities, his mind fractured by guilt he couldn't acknowledge and memories he couldn't escape. He died in 1978, 44 years old. Officially, heart failure. Really, a heart broken by what it had been forced to do. He was buried in the family cemetery, 50 yards from the killing field where 17 of his victims lay in unmarked graves. Wendell never fully recovered. The shattered femur healed wrong. He walked with a pronounced limp for the rest of his life, required a cane, spent his final decades in constant pain. He died in 1992, 68 years old, having never spoken about what happened to anyone outside the family. His silence was absolute, maintained through decades of physical suffering he accepted as penance. Grady lasted longer than anyone expected. He ran the yard until 1985, when failing health forced him to hand it over to Clayton. He spent his final years on the property, walking the land in the early mornings, visiting spots that only he knew contained human remains. He died in 1991, 72 years old. His obituary described him as a pioneer of the West Texas salvage industry and a devoted family man. It said nothing about 21 murders. Rafford surprised everyone by leaving. In 1980, he sold his share of the business to Clayton and moved to Oregon, as far from West Texas as he could get without leaving the country. He never explained why. He died in 2003, 64 years old. His son scattered his ashes in the Pacific Ocean, rather than bringing him home to be buried on Mitchell land. Of the 5 men who had killed 21 people in 1974, only Clayton remained. Clayton Mitchell turned 90 years old in March 2019. He had outlived everyone: his father, his uncle, his brothers, his wife, who had died in 2011 without ever learning what her husband had done before they met. He had watched the salvage yard decline as the oil industry changed. He sold the business in 1993, sold the equipment in 1998. He retained only the land itself, because selling it would mean allowing strangers to dig in soil that held too many secrets. He lived alone in the house his grandfather had built, surrounded by ghosts that grew more vivid as his body weakened and his mind wandered through memories he had spent decades trying to forget. When the archaeologists arrived, he knew immediately what they had found. He had been following the news about the pipeline project. He knew construction would eventually reach the edges of the Mitchell property. He understood that the secrets buried there might not stay buried forever. Part of him was almost relieved. The call came from his attorney on March 15, 2019, the day after the first skull was discovered. "Clayton, there's something happening on your property. The pipeline people found human remains. The sheriff's department is involved. They're talking about bringing in the Texas Rangers." "I know. How do you—" "I've been expecting this call for 45 years. Marcus. Those bones belong to men who died in 1974. Men that my family killed. 21 of them." The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like minutes. "Clayton, what exactly are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that those bodies are there because we put them there. I need you to come out here. There are things I need to tell you. Because when those Rangers start investigating, they're going to find out what happened. And I need to decide how I want this story to end." Marcus Webb had been Clayton's attorney for 23 years. He had never suspected that the quiet old man who paid his bills on time was harboring secrets that would make headlines across Texas. When he arrived at the Mitchell property that evening, Clayton was sitting on the porch with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Sit down, Marcus. This is going to take a while." Over the next 3 hours, Clayton told him everything. The flatbed truck, the Renfro brothers, the decision his father had made, The 21 men who had died over 8 months in 1974. The bodies buried across 47 acres. The silence maintained for 45 years. Marcus listened without interrupting. His face grew paler with each revelation. You're confessing to 21 murders. I'm telling you what happened. Whether it's a confession depends on what you do with it. Clayton, I'm your attorney. Anything you tell me is privileged. But if you're planning to confess publicly, I'm not planning anything. I'm 90 years old. I've got cancer that's going to kill me inside of a year. Whatever happens, I'm not going to see the inside of a prison cell. Then why tell me? Clayton was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the land. Because the truth deserves to exist somewhere. Not for justice. It's too late for justice. But for the record. So that when I'm gone, someone knows what really happened. Someone can decide whether to let it stay buried or bring it into the light. You want me to decide? I want you to hold on to what I've told you. When I'm dead, not before. I want you to give it to whoever's investigating. Let them have the truth, even if they can't do anything with it. Marcus wanted to refuse. Every legal instinct screamed that this was wrong. But he looked at Clayton, the 90-year-old man who had carried this weight for nearly half a century, asking for nothing except that the truth survive him. I'll do it, but I want you to write it down, everything, in your own words. A letter I can give to the investigators, signed and dated, so no one can claim I'm making this up after you're gone. I'll write it tonight. The letter took Clayton 12 hours to complete. He wrote by hand in the careful script his mother had taught him, page after page of memories he had tried to bury as deeply as the bodies themselves. He described the theft and the decision, the planning and the execution, the faces of men who had died at his hands. He named all 21 victims. He described where they were buried as precisely as his 90-year-old memory would allow. He explained why it had happened and how it had been concealed and what it had cost the people who had done it. He apologized. Not to his victims, it was too late for that, but to their families, to the wives who never learned what happened, to the children who grew up without fathers, to the mothers who died still wondering why their sons never came home. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that we weren't monsters. We were men who made a choice we believed was necessary, and we spent the rest of our lives paying for that choice in ways the law could never have imposed. He signed the letter, sealed it, drove to Marcus Webb's office the next morning. This is everything. When I'm dead, give it to whoever's in charge. Are you sure about this? I'm sure that I'm tired. Tired of carrying this, tired of pretending. Tired of being the last person alive who knows the truth. When I die, I want to die empty. I want to have given everything up. Marcus took the envelope. I'll keep it safe. Clayton drove home. He poured a glass of whiskey and sat on the porch, watching the sun set over land that had seen too much and kept too many secrets. He died 18 months later. September 14th, 2020. 91 years old. The cancer had spread beyond treatment. He was ready to go. When death finally came, he welcomed it like an old friend. Marcus Webb delivered the letter to Sergeant Gabriel Fuentes of the Texas Rangers on September 18, 2020. Fuentes read it twice, then a third time. Each reading revealed details he had suspected but couldn't prove. The investigation that had stalled for lack of evidence suddenly had everything. Names, dates, locations, motive, method. A complete account of 21 murders, written in the hand of one of the men responsible. It was the most comprehensive confession Fuentes had ever seen. And it was completely useless for prosecution. Every person named in the letter was dead. Clayton, Grady, Wendell, Rafford, Doyle. All gone, beyond the reach of any earthly justice. The victims were dead. Their killers were dead. All that remained was the truth itself, finally exposed after 46 years of silence. The investigation concluded in early 2021. The bodies that could be found were exhumed, identified through dental records and DNA, returned to families who had spent decades wondering what had happened. 17 bodies. 4 were never found. Clayton's memory had faded in some places, his descriptions too vague to pinpoint graves that time and weather had erased. They remained somewhere on the Mitchell property, or in the Arizona desert, or in locations only dead men know. The Mitchell property was sold in 2022, purchased by a development company planning to build a solar farm. Before construction began, a memorial was erected at the entrance, a simple stone marker listing the names of the 21 men who had died there and the year of their deaths. It says nothing about why they died, nothing about the flatbed truck that started everything, nothing about the family that decided justice was a personal matter and spent 8 months proving the point. Some stories don't have morals. Some stories are just accounts of what happened, offered without judgment, left for the living to interpret as they see fit. The Mitchells are gone now, all 5 of them, their graves scattered from West Texas to Oregon. They lived with what they did for decades, some for longer than others, some better than others. All of them carrying a weight that never got lighter. The Renfros are gone too, along with everyone who worked for them, everyone who helped them, everyone who made the mistake of being connected to a theft that seemed minor at the time and proved to be fatal. The land remains. The wind still blows across 47 acres of scrubland northeast of Odessa, carrying dust and memories and the echoes of things that happened half a century ago. The solar panels catch the sun now, converting light into electricity, generating power from soil that was fertilized by violence. And somewhere in the archives of the Texas Rangers, a letter sits in a file that will probably never be opened again. 12 pages of careful handwriting. The last testament of a man who killed and regretted and carried and finally confessed. The last line reads, "God forgive us for what we did. We couldn't forgive ourselves. Some debts can't be paid. Some sins can't be absolved. Some stories end not with justice, but with the simple, terrible truth. This is one of them."